My ex was way bigger than Ethan. The sentence floated across the backyard patio like cigar smoke, slow and poisonous, and for one strange second even the ice clinking inside my whiskey glass sounded too loud. Vanessa laughed right after she said it, head tilted back beneath the warm string lights hanging over our cedar fence, the kind of laugh that told everyone she thought she was clever. Claire nearly spit wine across the table. Derek covered his mouth with one hand while grinning into his beer. Somebody muttered, "Jesus," under their breath. And me? I just sat there staring at the grill smoke drifting into the August air while something cold settled deep in my chest. Not anger. Anger is loud. This felt quieter than that. Heavier. Like the exact moment a crack finally reaches the foundation of a house. Vanessa looked at me waiting for a reaction, blue eyes glittering with that little smirk she wore whenever she thought she controlled the room. We'd been married 11 years, and I knew every version of her smile. The playful one. The fake polite corporate one. The exhausted one she used on holidays with my family. But this one? This was the cruel one. The one that only showed up when she wanted an audience. The patio smelled like charcoal, sunscreen, and overpriced candles she bought from some boutique downtown. Music played softly through hidden speakers under the deck railing while moths bounced against the yellow lights overhead. From the outside, it probably looked like a perfect suburban Saturday night. Beautiful house outside Denver. Friends laughing around a fire pit. Expensive wine breathing on the table beside plates smeared with barbecue sauce. The kind of life people online pretend they're grateful for. But perfect things crack quietly long before they collapse. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other and took another sip of Pinot Grigio like she hadn't just sliced straight through me in front of 6 people. "Oh, come on," she said, smiling wider when nobody spoke. "Don't act all shocked. We're adults." More nervous laughter followed, thinner this time. Derek glanced toward me the way men do when they know another guy just got humiliated but don't want to step into the blast radius. I leaned back slowly in my chair and watched the condensation slide down my glass. My reflection warped in the whiskey amber. Funny thing about disrespect. It rarely starts with one moment. It builds quietly. Tiny cuts. Tiny jokes. Tiny little reminders that the person beside you stopped protecting your dignity a long time ago. Vanessa had been doing it for years. Small comments about my clothes in front of friends. Comparisons disguised as humor. Stories where I somehow always became the punchline. And every time, I convinced myself mature men didn't overreact. That marriage meant patience. Understanding. Taking the high road. But sitting there under those lights while my wife smiled at another man's memory like it was some trophy she still polished in private, I realized something dangerous. Patience and self-respect stopped being the same thing after a while. Claire finally broke the silence. "Vanessa," she whispered with a nervous laugh. "That's kinda harsh." Vanessa shrugged casually. "What? Ethan can handle it. He's not insecure." Then she reached over and touched my forearm like that settled everything. Like humiliation became harmless if she dressed it up as confidence. I looked down at her hand resting on my skin and noticed how cold her fingers felt despite the summer heat. Strange the details your brain remembers when something inside you changes forever. The music kept playing. Crickets hummed beyond the fence line. Somewhere down the block a dog barked twice and went silent again. Ordinary life kept moving while my marriage quietly shifted into something else entirely. And when I finally looked back up at Vanessa, her smirk was still there. But not for much longer. Nobody touched their drinks after that. It was strange how fast energy could leave a backyard. 10 seconds earlier everybody had been laughing over grilled steaks and vacation stories. Now the patio felt stiff, careful, like people suddenly remembered they had work in the morning. Vanessa either did not notice or pretended not to. That was one of her talents. She could turn cruelty into entertainment as long as enough people smiled along with her. She reached for the wine bottle and topped off her own glass first before offering anyone else more. The little things always tell the truth. I watched the candlelight flicker across her face while she kept talking like nothing had shifted. But I could feel it. Everybody else could too. The air had changed. Claire started scrolling her phone under the table. Derek suddenly became fascinated with the baseball game playing silently through the living room window. Melissa forced a laugh at something Vanessa said 3 seconds too late. Human beings hate tension. They will do almost anything to escape it. I took a slow sip of whiskey and let the burn settle in my chest. 4 fingers of Woodford Reserve. Meat. My second glass of the night, and probably the only honest thing left on that patio. Vanessa crossed her legs again and leaned back in her chair like she owned the moment. "Oh my God, everybody is acting so dramatic," she said. It was a joke. Then she looked directly at me. "Right, Ethan?" Funny how women ask for confirmation after they already drew blood. I held her gaze for a second longer than normal. Her smile flickered. Just barely. Most people would not have noticed it. But I did. 11 years of marriage teaches you where someone hides their fear. "Sure," I said calmly. "If you think it was funny." My voice stayed level. Controlled. That seemed to bother her more than anger would have. Vanessa always knew how to navigate emotion. Tears, yelling, guilt, apologies. Those were games she understood. Silence? Silence made her uncomfortable. Because silence leaves room for people to think. The fire pit cracked softly beside us while warm Colorado wind moved through the trees behind the fence. Somewhere inside the house the dishwasher hummed under the kitchen lights. Ordinary suburban sounds. Safe sounds. But sitting there watching my wife smirk over the rim of her wine glass, I realized something that landed harder than humiliation itself. She did not respect me anymore. And once respect dies inside a marriage, love starts rotting right behind it. The scary part was realizing this had not started tonight. Tonight was just the first time she stopped hiding it. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The little comments about my clothes before work dinners. The way she interrupted me mid-sentence around her friends. The jokes about me falling asleep before 10 because I woke up at 5 every morning to run a company with 40 employees depending on me. She called me predictable now. Boring. Safe. Like stability was somehow embarrassing. But there was a time Vanessa used to love those things about me. Back when we lived in a 700-square-foot apartment outside Aurora with mismatched furniture and a mattress on the floor because we could not afford a bed frame yet. Back then she used to wait for me by the door when I came home from 12-hour shifts at the construction site. She used to hold my face like I was the safest thing in her world. Somewhere between that apartment and this 6,000-square-foot house with the outdoor kitchen and imported patio furniture, admiration turned into contempt. Success changes people. Sometimes the people standing beside you change first. Derek cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, Ethan, how is the new downtown project going?" There it was. The desperate topic change. I almost smiled into my glass. Men understand rescue attempts even when nobody says it out loud. "Good," I answered simply. "Closing on Phase 2 next month." Vanessa cut in before anyone else could respond. "Which means I probably will not see him until Christmas." A few weak chuckles followed. Another joke. Another little cut. But this time something inside me stayed perfectly still. The conversation never really recovered after that. People tried. Humans always try to smooth ugly moments over with noise. Claire started talking about a new restaurant downtown. Melissa mentioned a ski trip planned for January. Derek kept laughing too hard at things that were not funny. But underneath it all, tension sat at the center of the patio table like another guest nobody wanted to acknowledge. Vanessa kept drinking anyway. That should have told me everything. Some people become softer with alcohol. Vanessa became sharper. Meaner in little polished ways that sounded harmless unless you were the one standing too close to the blade. I watched her swirl wine inside the glass while she smiled at everyone except me. The candlelight caught the gold bracelet on her wrist, the one I bought her last Christmas after she mentioned it exactly one time while passing a jewelry store in Cherry Creek Mall. I remembered standing in line 2 days before Christmas with snow soaking through my coat because I wanted to surprise her. Funny what the mind drags up during humiliation. Not the fights. Not the anniversaries. The effort. That is what hurts the most when respect disappears. The memory of how hard you tried for someone who slowly stopped valuing it. Vanessa tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and sighed dramatically. Honestly, Ethan works so much I barely see him anymore. She smiled while saying it, but there was accusation underneath. Sometimes I feel like I am married to a calendar invite. A few uncomfortable chuckles bounced around the table again. Nobody looked at me this time. They looked down. At drinks. Phones. Plates. Because decent people know when something starts crossing a line, even if they are too weak to stop it. I stayed calm. That was the part Vanessa never understood about me. She thought silence meant weakness because she confused restraint with fear. But I grew up around men who built things with their hands. Men who survived layoffs, storms, debt, funerals, and disappointments without turning every emotion into theater. My father used to say something when I was a kid working beside him during Colorado winters. He would tighten a bolt or wipe grease from his hands and say, "A man who loses control usually loses the room too." I carried that lesson into adulthood. Into business. Into marriage. Maybe longer than I should have. Vanessa had no idea how many things I absorbed quietly over the years just to keep peace inside our home. The forgotten birthdays because she was busy. The business dinners where she introduced me as if I were an accessory instead of the man who built half the life she enjoyed. The comments about other husbands making more time for their wives while I was running a commercial development company that paid for every square foot around us. I never threw those things back at her. I told myself mature marriages went through seasons. Stress. Distance. Growing pains. But sitting there under the patio lights watching my wife perform disrespect for an audience, something finally clicked into place. This was not stress anymore. This was contempt. And contempt changes the temperature of every room it enters. Derek stood up and grabbed the empty beer bottles from the table. "Anybody need another drink?" he asked too quickly. The man looked like he wanted to physically carry the awkwardness into the kitchen trash can. "I am good," I said. My voice sounded steady even to me. Vanessa glanced sideways at me with that same faint smirk still hanging on her lips. "You sure?" she asked. "Maybe whiskey is the only thing keeping this evening survivable for you." Claire immediately muttered, "Vanessa," under her breath. But Vanessa ignored her. She was enjoying herself too much now. That was the dangerous thing about public disrespect. Once someone realizes there are no consequences, they keep pushing to see how far they can go. I set my glass down carefully beside my plate and leaned back in the chair. The fire crackled softly between us while shadows moved across the fence line behind the yard. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled through the mountains even though the sky above us stayed perfectly clear. And for the first time all night, I noticed something strange. I was no longer embarrassed. Embarrassment needs emotional attachment. What I felt now was colder than that. The night should have ended there. Any decent spouse would have felt the shift in the room and pulled back. Change the subject. Smooth things over during cleanup, while guests grabbed their jackets and pretended not to notice the damage. But Vanessa had always mistaken restraint for permission. That was the problem with people who live for social validation. Once they feel an audience leaning their way, they keep performing. She stood from the table with her wine glass in hand and walked barefoot across the patio stones toward the outdoor speaker mounted beside the grill. Her white summer dress moved softly in the warm wind while she scrolled through music on her phone like nothing ugly had happened. Watching her from across the fire pit felt strangely detached now, like I was observing somebody else's marriage from a distance. The woman laughing under those lights no longer felt fully familiar to me. Maybe that was the real breaking point in relationships. Not screaming. Not betrayal. Recognition disappearing. Derek came back outside carrying fresh beers and handed one to me automatically out of habit. "You good?" he asked quietly enough that only I could hear. I almost laughed at the question. Men always ask each other that after public humiliation, even though nobody expects an honest answer. I am fine, I said calmly. And strangely enough, I meant it. Not because the comments did not hurt. They did. But because something inside me had finally stopped fighting reality. Vanessa was still near the speaker when she suddenly called out, "Claire, tell them about Cabo." Claire visibly froze halfway through opening a hard seltzer. "Vanessa," she warned softly. That tone. The one women use when they know another woman is about to cross a line publicly. Vanessa ignored it completely. "No, seriously." She laughed. "Tell them what Ryan said at the resort." There it was again. His name drifting through my backyard like a ghost she could not stop feeding. Claire shook her head immediately. "I do not think that is a good idea." Vanessa smirked into her wine. "Oh, come on. Ethan knows I dated people before him. He is a grown man." I watched Claire glance toward me with genuine discomfort now. That was when I realized something important. This was no longer normal married teasing to anybody at the table except Vanessa. Everybody else understood she was trying to establish dominance at my expense. The scary part was how comfortable she looked doing it. Melissa cleared her throat awkwardly. "Maybe we should play cards or something." But Vanessa had already locked into the performance. "Ryan used to say confidence was everything in a man," she said while leaning casually against the counter beside the grill. "Honestly, he kind of ruined dating after college." Derek stared down into his beer bottle so hard. It looked like he was trying to climb inside it. Claire closed her eyes briefly like somebody enduring turbulence on a plane. And me? I just sat there listening to my wife romanticize another man in front of our friends, while the fire cracked softly between us. The humiliation itself no longer shocked me. What shocked me was realizing how long she must have been carrying this level of disrespect privately before it finally spilled out in public. Vanessa took another drink and laughed lightly. "Ryan was insane though. Total chaos. Ethan is the opposite." She looked toward me then with that same polished little smile. "Stable. Responsible. Predictable." The way she said predictable sounded worse than an insult. Like she was describing furniture instead of a husband. Funny thing about successful men. People see the finished product and forget the years underneath it. The 80-hour work weeks. The stress. The risk. The sleepless nights wondering if payroll would clear. Vanessa enjoyed the life I'd built while quietly resenting the discipline it required to build it. Some people love comfort more than character. And once comfort becomes normal to them, they stop respecting the person who sacrificed to provide it. The Colorado wind moved colder through the backyard now, carrying the smell of distant rain even though the stars still burned clear above us. Vanessa brushed her hair behind her ear and smiled around the table again, waiting for more laughter. Waiting for validation. Waiting for everyone to agree she still held the power in the room. And that was the exact moment I realized she had no idea how close she was to losing it completely. The strange thing about humiliation is that eventually your body stops reacting to it. Somewhere between the third glass of wine and the fourth little joke at my expense, the embarrassment drained out of me completely. What replaced it felt colder. Cleaner. Like finally seeing a crack in a wall you had been pretending was not there for years. Vanessa was still talking near the outdoor counter, while everyone else performed the exhausting social dance of pretending this night could still become normal again. Claire kept checking her watch. Melissa volunteered to help clean dishes that did not need cleaning. Derek disappeared inside every 10 minutes just to escape the tension for a while. But Vanessa stayed energized by it. Some people feed off attention the same way fire feeds off oxygen. The more uncomfortable the room became, the brighter she seemed to glow inside it. I watched her laugh beneath the patio lights and suddenly remembered a winter 13 years earlier when we were both broke and sharing a tiny apartment with rattling windows outside Aurora. Back then she used to wear my old hoodies because the heater barely worked. We would sit on the kitchen counter eating cheap takeout while snow piled against the parking lot outside. She used to look at me like I was the safest man in the world. I remember one night after I landed my first commercial contract. Nothing huge. Just a small retail renovation in Boulder. I came home exhausted, hands cracked from cold weather and concrete dust still stuck to my boots. Vanessa met me at the door smiling so hard she almost cried. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "I know you are going to build an incredible life for us someday." That sentence stayed with me for years. It fueled things. Long mornings. Risk. Sacrifice. The pressure of carrying payroll for employees before I even paid myself. I built my company one brutal season at a time. 70-hour weeks. Coffee for dinner. Sleeping in my truck outside job sites during snowstorms because deadlines did not care about exhaustion. And every single step of it, I believed I was building something shared. A future for us. That was the lie hardworking men tell themselves sometimes. That sacrifice automatically creates loyalty. It does not. Sometimes success simply gives people a more comfortable place to disrespect you from. Vanessa leaned against the counter laughing at something Melissa said, but I noticed the tiny glances she kept sending toward me now. Quick little checks. Like she was monitoring whether I had finally broken emotionally yet. The problem was she misunderstood what had happened tonight completely. She thought she was winning some social game. What she did not realize was that somewhere over the last 2 hours, I had emotionally stepped backward from the marriage itself. It was subtle. Quiet. But permanent. People think relationships end with screaming fights or dramatic betrayals. Most of the time they end in moments exactly like this. A person says one thing too many and suddenly the other person stops seeing them the same way forever. The wind shifted colder through the backyard and thunder rolled again somewhere far beyond the mountains. Vanessa finally returned to the table carrying her wine glass and sat down across from me. Her cheeks were slightly flushed now, confidence glowing off her like heat from asphalt. "You are awfully quiet tonight," she said with a teasing smile. "Should we be worried?" Claire immediately stared at her plate. Derek rubbed his forehead slowly like a man developing a migraine in real time. Even Melissa looked uncomfortable now. But Vanessa kept pushing because she still believed silence meant weakness. I folded my hands loosely in front of me and looked at her calmly. Really looked at her. Not as my wife. Not as the woman I spent 11 years protecting. Just as a person sitting across from me revealing exactly who she was when applause mattered more than dignity. That was when the final piece clicked into place. Tonight was not about Ryan. Or old relationships. Or jokes. Tonight was about power. Vanessa needed to feel admired in the room, and the easiest way to elevate herself was standing on top of my respect to do it. The realization settled through me slowly, steady as snowfall. And once it landed, something inside me became very, very calm. The silence after Vanessa's last comment stretched longer than any of us expected. Even the fire seemed quieter now, reduced to soft orange cracks beneath drifting smoke. Nobody reached for food anymore. Half-empty wine glasses sat untouched around the table like evidence from a scene everybody wanted to leave behind. Vanessa noticed it too. I could tell by the way her smile tightened at the corners. Attention is addictive, but approval is what people like her really chase. And for the first time all night, the room was beginning to pull away from her instead of toward her. Claire stood slowly and gathered a few empty plates. "I should probably help clean up," she said too brightly. Melissa immediately stood with her, grateful for the escape route. Derek muttered something about checking the game inside even though his beer was still full. One by one, people started drifting toward the house, leaving the patio emptier by the minute. Vanessa laughed softly and shook her head. "Wow! Everybody suddenly became exhausted." Nobody answered her. That hit harder than any argument could have. Social energy is a strange thing. Once a room turns against somebody emotionally, they can feel it instantly even if nobody says a word. Vanessa sat back in her chair, crossing her arms now instead of her legs. Defensive. Irritated. She looked toward me expecting me to rescue the atmosphere somehow like I always did. For years I had quietly absorbed awkward moments, redirected conversations, softened tension after her sharper comments landed too hard. I was the stabilizer in the marriage. The one who kept things smooth. But sitting there beneath those patio lights, listening to distant thunder rolling through the Colorado dark, I realized I did not want to rescue this moment anymore. I wanted her to finally sit inside it. The kitchen light spilled through the sliding glass doors behind her while muffled voices moved around inside the house. Claire was running water at the sink. Derek pretended to care about whatever baseball game flickered across the television. Normal life sounds. But out on the patio, something heavier had settled between us. Vanessa swirled the last of her wine and finally looked directly at me. "You are really going to sulk over jokes all night?" she asked. There it was. The shift. First came mockery. Then dismissal. Next would come blame. The pattern suddenly looked so predictable to me I almost smiled. I stayed calm. "I am not sulking," I said evenly. "I am thinking." She rolled her eyes immediately. "God, you always do this. You turn everything into some deep, emotional issue." Funny thing about disrespect. Once somebody stops seeing your emotional boundaries as valid, they start treating your pain like inconvenience. Vanessa leaned forward slightly across the table, lowering her voice now that the others were inside. "You know what your problem is, Ethan," she said. "You take yourself too seriously." The firelight flickered across her face while she spoke, throwing shadows beneath her eyes I had never really noticed before. Not age. Weariness. Restlessness. A constant hunger for validation disguised as confidence. And suddenly I understood something I should have realized years ago. Truly happy people do not humiliate the person who loves them for entertainment. They just do not. Vanessa had spent the entire night trying to prove something to everybody at this table, including herself. That realization removed the last little sting from her words completely. Because once you see insecurity underneath cruelty, the cruelty loses power. She mistook my silence for defeat. That was her final mistake. I rested my hands on the table and slowly stood up from the chair. The movement alone changed the air between us. Vanessa's expression flickered immediately. Just for a second. Not fear exactly. Uncertainty. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt calmly while the wind pushed cool air through the backyard. Somewhere inside the house Derek laughed too loudly at something on television. The sound felt miles away now. Vanessa watched me carefully as I stepped around the fire pit toward her side of the patio. No anger in my face. No raised voice. That seemed to unsettle her more than shouting ever could. Because deep down, people understand something dangerous about calm men. The quiet ones do not explode immediately. They decide. Vanessa's eyes followed me carefully as I stopped beside the edge of the patio table. The firelight moved across the wine glass in her hand, trembling just slightly now despite the calm expression she was trying hard to maintain. Inside the house, laughter drifted faintly from the television, but out here the silence had turned heavy enough to feel physical. The kind of silence where every tiny sound suddenly matters. Ice settling in a glass. Wind moving through trees. The soft scrape of my shoe against stone. Vanessa tilted her head with that familiar smirk still hanging onto her lips, but it looked weaker now. Forced. "What?" she asked lightly. "You are acting dramatic." I looked at her for a long second before answering. Not angry. Not emotional. Just clear. Funny thing about clarity. Once it arrives, it strips emotion out of situations that used to control you. "No," I said quietly. "I think tonight finally makes sense." Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. "What is that supposed to mean?" I slid my empty whiskey glass onto the patio counter beside her untouched wine bottle and folded my hands loosely in front of me. The cold night air moved between us while thunder rolled again somewhere deep beyond the Rockies. "You know what is actually interesting?" I asked calmly. "Women only bring up old relationships when they are trying to convince themselves they made the right choice." The smirk on her face flickered immediately. Tiny. But real. Vanessa let out a short laugh anyway. "Wow. That is what you came up with," she said. "That sounded way cooler in your head, huh?" I barely reacted. No, I answered evenly. What sounded sad was hearing a married woman spend an entire night trying to get validation from memories instead of her actual life. The words landed harder than I expected them to. Vanessa's posture changed almost instantly. Shoulders tightening. Chin lifting defensively. Her eyes darted toward the house for half a second like she suddenly became aware other people might hear us. That was the moment I realized something important. Humiliation only feels entertaining when you believe you control it. The second the spotlight turns around, panic starts creeping in. Vanessa crossed her arms slowly. "You are unbelievable right now," she muttered. But the confidence was slipping out of her voice now, 1 inch at a time. I stayed calm. Calm enough to make every word feel heavier. "No," I said softly. "What is unbelievable is that you thought this entire night made you look powerful." The wind pushed her hair lightly across one side of her face. She brushed it back immediately, irritated now instead of amused. "It was a joke, Ethan." There it was again. The universal defense of cruel people. Once consequences arrive. I nodded once. "Right. Except nobody was really laughing anymore." Silence. Deep silence. The kind that forces truth into the room whether people want it there or not. Through the kitchen window I could see Claire standing near the sink pretending not to stare outside. Derek had paused near the living room doorway too. Everybody felt it now. Vanessa swallowed once and set her wine glass down harder than necessary against the table. "So what?" she snapped quietly. "You are trying to embarrass me back now?" I looked directly at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time all night, I did not see confidence. I saw insecurity wrapped in expensive clothes and polished sarcasm. A woman so desperate to feel admired she would chip away at her own marriage publicly just to keep attention focused on herself for one more evening. The realization almost made me sad. Almost. "No," I said finally, my voice low and steady as the wind moving through the trees behind us. "I think you embarrass yourself all on your own. Happy women do not need audiences to disrespect their husbands. Only unhappy ones do." The words hit her like cold water. Her face changed instantly. Not dramatic. Worse than that. Quiet. The smirk disappeared first. The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa stared at me across the patio table like she had suddenly forgotten where she was. The confidence she carried all night had cracked so fast it almost looked painful. Not because I raised my voice. Not because I insulted her. But because for the first time all evening, the attention in the room stopped feeding her and started examining her instead. That is the dangerous thing about public humiliation. It cuts both ways once the audience changes sides. Through the sliding glass doors, Claire stood completely still near the kitchen sink holding a dish towel she had forgotten to use. Derek leaned against the wall beside the television with his beer halfway to his mouth. Melissa looked down at the floor the second Vanessa turned toward the house. Nobody wanted eye contact anymore. The social gravity had shifted. Vanessa felt it instantly. Her cheeks flushed deeper beneath the patio lights while she forced out a short laugh that sounded thin and unstable. "Wow," she said quietly. "So now I am the villain because you cannot take a joke?" I stayed calm. The calmer I became, the more unsettled she looked. "No," I answered evenly. "You became the villain when embarrassing your husband became entertainment for you." Her jaw tightened immediately. "Oh my God, Ethan!" She threw one hand in the air dramatically. "You are being ridiculous." But even she did not sound convinced anymore. Her voice had changed. Softer underneath the irritation. Defensive. The kind of tone people use when they realize the room no longer sees them the way they expected. Vanessa glanced toward the kitchen again, probably hoping somebody would jump in and rescue the moment. Nobody moved. Claire suddenly became very interested in rinsing plates that were already clean. Derek stared into his beer bottle like it contained survival instructions. Humans avoid emotional fallout when they know the truth already landed. I slipped my phone and wallet into my jacket pocket calmly while the fire behind us faded lower into glowing coals. The smell of rain drifted stronger through the night air now, cool wind moving across the patio stones beneath our feet. Vanessa watched me carefully. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Leaving," I said simply. That word hit her harder than anything else had. I saw it immediately. Her posture straightened. Eyes narrowing. Not anger this time. Alarm. Because deep down, people always know the exact moment somebody emotionally detaches from them. Vanessa stood up too quickly from her chair. "Seriously?" she asked with a nervous laugh. "You are really storming out over this?" Funny thing was, I was not angry anymore. Anger still carries emotional investment. What I felt now was clarity. Quiet clarity. The kind that arrives after months or years of ignoring truths you already knew. I grabbed my truck keys from the patio counter beside the empty whiskey glass and looked at her one last time beneath the yellow lights. Her mascara was still perfect. Her dress still elegant. But the smugness that had followed her around all evening was gone now. Completely gone. In its place sat uncertainty. "I am not storming out," I said calmly. "I just finally understand the difference between a woman who respects her husband and one who performs for attention." Vanessa opened her mouth immediately, ready with another comeback, but nothing came out this time. Because there are moments when people realize they pushed something too far and cannot pull it back anymore. You can actually watch the realization happen across their face. Tiny shifts. Tightening around the eyes. The sudden panic behind silence. I walked toward the sliding glass doors while thunder rolled softly over the mountains again. Derek stepped aside without saying a word as I entered the kitchen. Claire looked up at me with genuine sympathy in her eyes now. Nobody stopped me. Nobody tried to smooth things over anymore. The performance was finished. Behind me, through the glass, Vanessa still stood alone on the patio beside the dying fire with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold wind. And for the first time all night, she looked exactly like someone who realized the room had finally stopped laughing with her.